we go.
We good?
Yes, we are good. I fixed technical difficulties. So this is a interesting topic we're going on to. I was thinking all week about how I would make something like clever, some clever hook, and honestly, everything came up cheap. And I think a big reason for that is because I've experienced a very similar situation to the main character, Connor.
Mhm.
And uh, I think a lot of people experience this loss, right? Very few people will go through life without losing someone super important to them. And I think this book does a interesting conversation on how someone can handle that loss or that pending loss. And so that's what we're going to talk about tonight.
And with that somber but very profound intro, welcome to this week's episode of the 800's. I'm your host, Alex, and my guest host with me today is Alan, also doubling as our tech guy. Adam is still out on paternity leave. I believe he'll be back for the next stream.
Yeah,
Uh,
I think so.
feel free to correct me if I'm wrong if you're somewhere out there. Uh, uh, now quick word about our sponsors and such.
Yeah. So, first off, you can find all our casts on Twitch after the fact or on YouTube if you prefer after the fact. All our conversations are open to be discussed over on YouTube in the comments section. Also, uh, a big shout out to Audible. If you haven't heard about Audible by now, I I'm quite surprised. Uh, but you should do yourself a service and go out there and look at Audible as a audiobook platform. It's a fantastic platform. All three of us utilize it, and it's great for multitasking, getting through great content, and yeah, I absolutely love the service. You can help us out and inform yourself by checking out dmstable.com/audible. That will take you over to the Audible site and get you cool perks like a 30-day free trial, two free books, and stuff like that. So go check it out. Also, at the start of the stream, while we were loading, you heard Fearless First by Incompetech. You can check out Incompetech at incompetech.filmmusic.io. And if you want, the vote is still open over on our Patreon to choose the first book for our Black History Month book. Go check out our Patreon at patreon.com/dmstable.
All right, and this week on the 800s, we will be discussing the award-winning novel *A Monster Calls* by Patrick Ness, Dewey Decimal Designation to 823.6. This particular book was actually inspired by an idea from another author, Siobhan Dowd, who was unable to bring the idea to fruition before her own passing. Patrick Ness completed his story based on Dowd's idea in 2011. Imagined in present-day England, we follow the point of view of Connor O'Malley, a boy in the midst of personal crisis as he struggles to cope with his mother's illness. Awaking from his darkest nightmare, he gazes out to the yew tree in the distance when suddenly a monster calls.
So, what we're going to do on the show is pretty simple. We are going to basically ask a question, and while Alex and I are discussing it, chat, feel free to jump in, add to the conversation, ask your own questions, and it is going to kind of be this back and forth thing, and it's very fun to do. So please feel free to join.
And our usual quick disclaimers: this is not intended to be a kids show. We We'll try not to rely on swearing, but it will probably happen. And we are trying to build a fun community and a supportive community of people who get to enjoy their hobbies and interests together. So, be nice or get the hell out.
Yes.
All right.
So,
So, first
this,
impressions.
yeah, well, before that, I want to thank
Okay.
Adam because Adam actually suggested this book,
All right.
and so I wanted to give a shout out to him for it. Thank you, Adam, for the suggestion. So first impressions, yes.
Uh, well, technically, I guess for me, this is a second impression because I had read this book before. I'd actually seen the movie, which I want to clarify. We are not going to be talking about the movie. This is a discussion just about the book. Uh, and then I ended up reading the book afterwards, and I reread it again. And the best way I can describe it is this book is what I consider to be an emotional tour de force. I mean, the fact that it had the kind of impact that it did a second time reading it is, it's pretty incredible. You know, it may even be to the point where, yeah, it can be very helpful and cathartic for some, but you may want to you're definitely going to want to brace yourself or warn people to brace themselves before reading this book.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I would certainly echo that. I really enjoyed the discussion as far as like the topic, but at the same time, it was like, man, I kind of wish I was. This book is one of the books that I wish we would read beforehand, so I can be like, hey, listen, this could be triggery for some people, and
Mhm.
so there's big loss in here, but it was interesting. Another big uh, impression I had, like right off the bat, was this was big font, and images all over the place. Gorgeous, gorgeous images. I think the author's or the illustrator's name is Jim Kay, and he
Yeah, he
did.
actually won awards for that art too,
He
which
should. He did.
absolutely was deserved.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I looked at it and I said 200 pages. Okay, we can totally do this. And then I opened up the book and it's images, interweaved into the narrative, and it's reflective of what's going on to some degree without giving things away. And I loved it. It shortened the book up. This book is 200 pages, but with the size of font and with the images, it's probably in the low to mid 100s, I would say.
Yeah, when you get the PDF version, it comes out to about 150 ish.
Okay,
And the
nailed it.
PDF version only has like the images from like the first couple pages, but like the actual book has all the way through, and it's like 200 or something. But like, it's such a great read, honestly. Uh, A. Skittle said his first impression was that it was a great book for ignoring typical tropes, and it strays away from the fairy tale type of goings on. Yeah,
Yes,
it definitely is not a fairy tale. It is
it's a real
great.
story.
Well, it's. I think the term is low fantasy as
Okay,
opposed to high fantasy, where it's like fairy tales are typically fairly high fantasy
yeah,
when you think about it, but this is fairly low fantasy because it's very real, and there's only really one fantastical element to it, and it's one that may or may not exist,
right,
like, and or at least not in the what form that it takes in certain aspects, and it kind of has to be that because the it forces us to face a reality of this world is that not every story has a fairy tale ending.
right. I I would also say that this story this story acts like a real story. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
Like it it doesn't it doesn't have like necessarily a discernible hero's journey. And so when you're looking at this story from a literary perspective, like it's very like like visceral. You know, I don't know.
It's a very human journey.
Yes,
It's
yes, yeah, that's exactly it.
and that's kind of how it's meant to be. And before we get too deep into this,
Yeah,
quickly, K. Brock has a good point. The author, K. Brock 3360, says that the author uses a fairy tale style to tell the real truth, and it that's about as accurately as I could ever say it. So
yeah,
thank you for that, K.
nailed
Brock.
it.
Um, you know, the thing is that theme of telling real stories echoes not just in the overarching story, but in the stories that the monster tells. And with that, what were your thoughts about the first story that he told?
So I I was super into it. One second. Where
Yeah,
is
get that question out to our chat there, and I guess I'll
Okay,
answer.
go for it. Go for
Yeah,
it.
while
Yeah, yeah.
we're waiting on that. Um, Personally, I thought the first story was probably the easiest for me to understand because that's one thing we have to keep in mind here is that this is actually technically a children classified as a children or young adult book, and there are some fairly simple themes. And I think of the three stories, this was the easiest one for me to parse out the like lesson behind it before it finished. Like as the story was being told, I'm like, I know where
Yeah.
this is going. It's not going to be all as it seems.
Yep.
It still rings true and it's still very poignant. Is that people like not always having a good guy or a bad guy? I believe A Skittles getting ahead of me on this one. He said that it really hit home for him because he liked the idea that you don't have to have an happy ending, and it
Yeah.
instead makes you wonder who even is the good guy anyway.
Yeah.
But to the monster's point, what I liked and what I more or less predicted is that there's not always a good guy or a bad guy,
Yep.
and we sometimes even
Some people just need to be saved.
bad acts can't lead to good out in reality. Sometimes bad acts lead to relatively good outcomes and vice versa. I mean, it's tricky because it's never
Yeah.
as simple and straightforward as we like to think about it.
Yeah, I think that can only be said in hindsight. Uh
Yeah, it
yeah.
can only be said in hindsight, but like that's what stories are. Is
Right.
stories are all hindsight.
Right. That's fair. That's fair. Yeah, I
Like unless except for the story that we're living,
yeah.
and even then, we can only tell it up to the points that we've already lived.
Yeah.
And as it unfolds, like we can only face the truths that are right in front of us, which is what the monster does when he goes and saves the witch. Is he dealt with the truth in front of him that she was not a murderer?
Right.
What truths may have been had he done nothing,
Right.
we'll never know because that wasn't the story. That was you can only deal with the truths in front of you.
Yeah.
So what about
So I would say that I enjoyed the story, but like you, it solidified what I thought was going on right at the start. And
mhm.
so to some degree, I wouldn't say it took the wind out of my sails, but like I basically was like I remember sitting there reading and going, "Oh no." And Alexis is like, "What's up?" And I'm like, I'm only X pages in and I know how this is going to end. Like I know where this is going. Like that first story is like a like really big um tell. So
Mhm.
it was still good and it didn't ruin the book. It just made me start thinking that the book is like what the monster says. Stories are like wild creatures.
Yep. Uh, I really love that line. I know that
Yep.
we tweeted it out as part of our promotion for this, but it rang so true, and it ended up the stories were just kind of carriers for these messages that were worth it at the end, but
Yeah.
because we're adults, the stories weren't always the most compelling, but they don't always have to be. And I think what ended up being the most interesting was the interactions with the monster and Connor at the very end of all the stories, where he
Yeah,
would get ahead of himself, make an assumption, and it wasn't the this is the ending I was predicting. It was the explanation of the ending
right.
that was more profound, at least for me as an adult
Yeah.
reader.
I
Um,
I was gonna say that one of the things that kind of threw me for a loop was I was having a really hard time seeing how the stories that he was telling like tied into what was happening in the book at that moment, right? So like the grandma just shows up and then the monster tells the story of the prince and the queen, right? And I was like, what the f is it getting at? Right? Like
See, I
who
kind of
is the grandma? And I still don't know. Who is the grandma?
See, I kind of got that there's not always a direct allegory in any of these situations where it's not just going to be you can plug the X person into this person. It was more of a Connor was he was placing people in positions based on his perception, and all the monster was doing is rattling those perceptions, is like forcing him to look like, just because you have a perception of something doesn't mean it is
Okay.
what it is.
Okay.
The closest you can come actually is more so Connor making the witch into a bad person just because somebody said it was so, and he was kind of doing the same thing to himself with his grandma. That's the closest to an allegory there might be,
Mhm.
but I think it was more the practice of shaking off that self perception, especially in the wake of grief, which is something that's very easy to do because we cling to the things that seem familiar and feel right.
Mhm.
Uh, A Skittle says to go Life of Pi on this. Uh, did Connor come up with the first story because of his grandmother? Is his grand's evil queen, and is he the prince? Uh,
I
I
so to jump in on this one,
Go
I
ahead.
would almost argue that while the story was going, he likened himself to the prince and his grandma to the queen, and I think you are exactly right. Is the monster's there to rattle that perception and tell him, listen, you're not the prince, and you're not the queen, and she's not the queen. You know, this is just a story.
Yeah. Yeah, and I would agree. And to kind of play off of this Life of Pi situation, we're dealing with a situation where we don't know at this point what the monster is. Is it real? Is it fake? Is it an
Right.
imagination or not? So at this point in the book, I want to pose this question to our readers. What did you think the monster was? Did you think he was
Uh,
real? Did you think he was a figment of the imagination? Some combination of the two? Yeah, so let us know what you thought. Personally, I was biased because I've read the book before, but I'm trying to remember back to when I first read it. And I think I came in with this idea that the monster was going to be real because it was a fantasy book. And, like, or actually, more accurately, that's how I felt when I saw the movie, because I saw the movie first and then read the book. So I'm going off of my first impressions.
mhm.
Um,
I so like having been new to the story on this one, I think like when I think I was easily to jump to this could be real. And at this point in the story, to answer the question, at this point in the story, I was like, "Yep, it's real." And it's a little creepy because the thing showed up, and then all of a sudden, all these nestles are on the ground. All these leaves are on the ground. There's this little like, okay, yeah, it might be like him leaving the window open, but then when the first story comes, all the berries are on the ground. What the f?
Hey, Brock, if you could clarify what you mean by, she said that,
Connor
well,
lives. Yeah, Connor lives out all the stories.
and I guess he kind of does. Like, the closest allegory I can think of is actually not anything that happened with his grandma, but also almost. more. Well, I mean, it doesn't match quite up, but like it felt more like the bullying scene,
Yeah,
where he sacrifices his friend to gain the support of the well, the
I don't
people.
know.
I know,
I don't
like
know. That's
it's
falling
like
apart.
it's that one's that one. I don't know.
I could see
He
where you're
kind of lives
going.
them out, but
Yeah.
like there's elements in different parts. But I that's this first story is probably the one that I would most disagree with that he lives it out completely.
Hmm.
Like in some ways he does metaphorically. He lives pieces of it out. Like he sacrifices a friend for his benefit. He has an evil person that he puts up in this evil pedestal because he believes himself to be justified to do so. Uh, and but like I don't see anything that fully meshes. I can see that a little bit more with the other ones, and we'll get to those as we go. Um,
Yeah. I
but
I like what Skittles is saying. He said, uh, "I took it as a coping mechanism. He felt very much like he couldn't talk to anyone, so he imagined someone to talk to." I think for sure. Like I don't know at this point in the book I would have came to that conclusion, but by the time I got to the end, I was right there with you.
yeah, at the beginning it's harder to tell. I think just because we have, if you don't know the premise of the book and you go into it, it can seem like it's meant to be a real creature.
Hmm.
Uh, and I think Patrick Ness does a good job of throwing in just enough doubt in there, like with the leaf that's in the room after the monster
Yeah.
disappears,
Yep.
like
The berries.
just enough doubt.
Yeah. I
And
I still want to know where the berries came from. Did he? So I by the end I'm like, man, I think this is a coping mechanism, right? Like it's very clear, but at least to me. But still, like you said, like he Patrick throws in enough stuff where you're like, where did the berries come from?
just enough to keep it going
Yep.
along. Keep the monster a monster and something give it by giving it something tangible. You
Something.
know,
Go ahead.
but before we move on to like more towards the middle of the book,
Yeah.
I do want to ask a bit more about. Um, I was trying to segue into this a little bit with my
Just barrel
uh,
in.
how see. What did you guys think about Connor's reaction to
Ooh.
standing up for him and how he seemingly embraced the bullying, or more so rejected her offer of help? You know, and not just rejected it, but rejected it at least with, to me, what sounded like a level of disgust.
Yeah. I think Connor at this point is, I don't know if masochistic is the right word, but I think he is literally trying to gain unfavorable attention because he feels he deserves it to some degree. I
That's actually a really good insight. You had me like I was so ready to disagree with you until you added that last little bit because he thinks he deserves it. Because I think that on some level he and we'll find this out as we go, but like on some level there is a hatred for how he feels about the situation,
Yeah.
and it's the well, everything. It seems like a lot of the stuff in his world feels fake and forced. Like the way he talks about the way the teachers changed the way they talked to him and the way that they addressed him, and the only thing that felt like, and the fact that he wasn't willing to accept that, he probably doesn't think he deserves it, and that's that little hint that he doesn't. Right there is that he's not accepting his help, and I mean, but the thing is I can kind of empathize with that.
Yeah.
Is when you're going through something really terrible, having that's already such a huge change. Having everything else change and people treat you like walking on eggshells, it's kind of, I don't know. It would be frustrating for me as well. I don't take well to pity, and uh, to move on. with this towards more to the middle themes. How did you see pity versus sympathy versus empathy coming up in this book, particularly through the middle of the book? And how would you have reacted if you were to each of those, pity, sympathy, and empathy, if you were in Connor's situation?
That's quite the question. Let's see. Let's boil that down. Let's.
Like, okay, so we'll start with pity,
Yeah.
because my first reaction to pity is I get angry because it bothers me, because it's not you actually wanting to help, it's you like not wanting to break something, and it you know it's just frustrating to me more than anything, I guess.
All right. So I'm gonna level with you. That was a really long question.
Yeah. Sorry.
What? What
So how
was
would
the question?
um how would you react if, like, put yourself in Connor's
Yeah.
shoes? How would you react if, like, adults started coming at you with these three things? Because he gets a little bit of each: pity, sympathy, and empathy. And, like, how would you react to those if you were, like, in his shoes?
Yeah. To pity, empathy.
Oh, do you name it? Like, are you
Yeah.
looking up the definition? Well, that's a totally fair thing, because they are very similar, particularly sympathy and empathy, and there's blurred lines between them. And that's actually kind of what I wanted. The point I wanted you to get to is
Yeah.
it can be confusing to process the difference between them. So that's how you wind up with people biting the hand that feeds them in these grief-stricken times.
Yeah. I think
Um,
so. Like to talk to this a little bit. So I. So I'll get into it real quick. Um. I I lost my father when I was 12. And so this puts me pretty much right where Connor is. I believe Connor's 13 in the book. And I can say being in that situation, it's awful. Like to experience all three of those, right? To experience someone giving you pity. Even though that's what you need, right? These things are what you need from people. You need people to show that they're still there. But while you're in the moment, it is you have such disdain for pity and for empathy and sympathy, because at that time, at least for me, and I think Connor showed this as well, is he feels that no one understands what he's going through, and that because they're treating him with these three things, they they are focusing on him when he doesn't want to be focused on, or treating him special when he doesn't want it. He just wants it all to go back to normal. He doesn't
mhm.
want to be in the situation he's in, so stop putting the spotlight on the situation. Um, but that's also part of what needs to happen. So, yeah,
Yeah.
I would certainly hate it.
Yeah, that's excellent insight from probably the you have the most direct experience with something like that. I mean, I've had my losses, but you're right there. And I think uh, A Skittle, he says that it would depend on the type. Pity in particular definitely pisses him off. I felt the same way. Sympathy depends on how it's approached, which is understandable, because sympathy can feel a bit apathetic sometimes, because sympathy is the "I'm sorry for your loss."
Yeah.
Like, that's doing it can feel like the bare minimum, but if you approach it the right way, it can be helpful. And he also mentioned that empathy, it would depend on who it came from, and Kay Brock kind of, I think, brings it home when she says the truth is that we all want those things, depending on, when it comes from someone, and it has to
Mm-hmm.
come from the right person. And I
Yeah.
think that person that Connor really wanted it to be was his dad. He wanted it
Ooh.
so bad from his
Ooh.
dad for his dad to be that right person, and he never
Ooh.
quite stepped up to the bat. A Skittle says, yeah, he echoed what you said. That it's hard to accept in the moment,
Mm-hmm.
um, And yeah, I would agree. A Skittle, he does accept those things in the end, and I think we're gonna definitely come back to that once we get towards the end themes.
Yeah,
You know.
I liked what K Brock said. She said, but then no one despite their intent can really understand what our truth is. And I think that's true. I think that that in there is certainly why he's angry, is because not only does he not only is everybody like shoving down his throat the truth he's trying to avoid, but they're not experiencing it with him, and so there's that clear rejection. Yeah,
Hmm.
yeah,
Yeah, and it becomes this self-defeating cycle, and I think that's how the monster ends up manifesting.
hmm
Is it he's stuck in the cycle of I need these things, I am unwilling and unable to accept it. How am I going to get there? And to that end, what were your thoughts on the second story?
ooh, go ahead, hit me.
Oh, you're going to put this up
Yep.
there. Okay. So the second story, I think, was the one for me that I identified with the most. It was the one that I got the most into through the actual story
hmm
portion of it, at least of the three told by the monster.
the second
Um,
the second story is the apothecary, correct?
yeah,
Okay.
yes, yeah. And I think part of the reason why I got so into it, it's the only one that I actually struggled to get on board with the monster's lesson at the or his meaning at the end of it, or the fact that he went after the priest for not believing. And I get you can't give up your beliefs and hope and hope that something works that you previously didn't believe work, because it's going to undermine everything that you're doing with it. And I found, I guess the hardest part for me to be okay with was the fact that he destroyed the house of somebody who was in such desperation. Like, I get not helping him from the apothecary's standpoint,
Yeah.
kind of, because the apothecary was true to his nature. He was a curmudgeon, and he
hmm
uh, was basically scoffed at, and he just scoffed back. He stayed true to his nature, but the hardest part for me to get at was the why the monster lashed out at the guy who was in such desperation. Unless I know what it led to, but like I
Yeah.
that's the part is I didn't quite ever get
Yeah.
that, and
I
I
think
wonder if anybody out there did, because I just
I so I just
like I
kind of took
identified
it.
with the person or whatever that dude's guy up until the after he was desperate. That's the part that I identified with, but
Yeah, I would say like I just kind of took it as I read it, right? I didn't really look too deep into that, and I think to some degree Patrick has some leeway, right? This is a kid's book, so kids are going to read it very similar to how I read it, where it's just gonna be like, oh, okay, Pat, really, what happened was Connor destroyed the room, and the story there is no like need for linkage. But I think you're right. Like if we look at the motive, the modus opera, whatever the reason why the motive that the monster had for destroying the house, I don't understand it. I don't understand why the monster would come walking for that sort of thing, and really felt like it was just for, yeah, that one. Um,
yeah,
it
modus operandi.
Yeah, it just kind of felt like it was a literary like tie through line that allowed the author to get from Connor not being okay to Connor destroying things, right? Like that's all it really felt like at the end after you pointed this out, right? Like if you didn't point that out, I never would have thought of it. But now that you've said something, I have no clue why the monster went walking.
The closest I can come to is I wonder if the monster was the manifestation of that man's rage in the same way that he was for Connor. Like
Mm-hmm.
that's the closest I can come to. Um, well, K Rock, I agree. I knew the minister was going to get it.
Yeah.
Like it wasn't going to be the apothecary because the apothecary was true to his nature, and it like hypocrisy is clearly something the monster doesn't deal with
Well, that and the
because it's
monster.
because it's a lie. It's not a truth.
Yeah.
He's not living a truth. I
That.
just don't. There is a bit more resolution with the other stories that okay, his final action that he took makes more sense. And the closest again that I can come to is that in both cases he was the rage of the hurt and the desperate,
Yeah. Okay. That's
acting
fair.
out on their own surroundings, and
Yeah.
that's what gets you to the destruction of his grandma's room. And to
Mm.
that point, what were your thoughts about that aftermath, and particularly the grandma's reaction?
Yeah. So I really thought like I felt so bad for the grandma. Like uh I felt so bad for the grandma because the grandma's going through the same thing. Out of everybody Connor knows, he doesn't understand that she is the most related person to the issue, right? And
Mm-hmm.
and he doesn't get it until right near the end where he's like, "Well, of course, she's your daughter." You know, and man, I felt so bad for her. And to some degree like I was like, "Yep, you needed that, buddy. Like you needed to destroy some stuff." But in that room, that come on, man. Come on. Yeah.
Yeah, he certainly did go for bang for his buck on that one. Askittle, not a lot of levity in this particular live stream, but got me a little chuckle. Her reaction was, "Damn it, I wanted to wreck the room," and maybe that's. I'm wondering if there's a little bit of a tie in there as well with us kind of bringing uh, destruction on people who may not deserve it
Mhm.
the same way that the monster, like the guy didn't necessarily deserve destruction brought upon his house, but sometimes it happens in the midst of that anger in the same way that Connor brings destruction on his grandma's room.
Mhm.
Like I agree, I completely felt bad for the grandma. As an adult I can see that, but as a kid I get it. It's
Yeah.
you want to see the world in black and white, especially at the kind of that kind of age. You're only just starting to figure out how emotions work, and how to express them, and to deal with something that devastating
Yeah.
is it's no small task. I mean, apparently it requires a monster.
Yeah. I think to some degree she wanted to wreck something, right? She was at that breaking point too. I don't know if that room was necessarily the thing, but at the end with the I think it was a curio cabinet or something like
Yeah,
that. You know,
like he had
she
broken the outside glass, but it was
yeah,
still the only thing standing.
yeah. I can just like picture that situation of her like trouncing through all of the now destruction just to destroy the last like hanging piece, almost like that comedic like last thing to fall after like a big explosion or something. But yeah, it was powerful. i
Yeah.
i would like to point something out here too. At this point in the story, I really noticed something big, or started like really questioning. I think it might have been like a little bit before the story, back
Mhm.
when he was sleeping, when he slept on the CD in his mom's house when his grandma
Mhm.
came to stay. I think it was when the tree like grew out of the floor, but
Yeah.
uh, I the 1207 thing, what a powerful like narrative tool that I think to some degree, because I had called it from the start so early and was really confident in what I was in the ending. I think the 1207 thing helped me get through some of the book where I was like, I could put this down. I know what's gonna happen. Uh, but it just kept pushing me to be like, what the f? What is going on with 1207? Why does the monster always show up at 1207?
Well, I actually had the same question. I ended up looking this up, and there were a number of theories, but one of them what actually applies to the Bible. Job 12:7 has a line that says, "Ask now the beasts, and they shall teach thee." And the monster always appears at 12:07.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm wondering, even though he doesn't say it, I'm wondering if that's also the time that the mom
It is,
passes.
and they
Oh
they
yeah,
they
that's
do
right.
say
You're
it.
right. Yeah,
It is.
I totally forgot that.
Yep.
I read the book a while
So it came
like
it
at the
came like
beginning.
full circle, which made
Yeah,
it like this awesome through line, which I just super appreciated. So
yeah.
yeah, I mean, I just wanted to call that out. Like, even though it really comes to culmination at the end of the book, I at about this time of the book, I was like, what is going on? And helped me get through like the really cringy part of like the destruction and
Mhm.
his grandma and him not
Yeah, that
talking.
was
So
yeah. And I want to get a little bit into what our
Jets
chat
saying,
is
oh
saying.
yeah, they got quite the conversation.
Actually, one of the things K Rock brings up is K Rock actually identifies with the grandmother. I said she because grandmother, but like like the I don't think a lot of people, at least I didn't, like I could understand and empathize with it, but like I didn't identify with the grandmother quite a lot, and that's really interesting, K Rock, that you like identify with her, and in particular that you mentioned that the grandmother gets the rage that Connor has, but
Yeah,
she never would have showed it without Connor.
yeah, yeah.
And I completely agree. It's like because she has to be the rock, and once she sees
Yep,
that, like, okay, the rock thing isn't working,
yeah,
she lets go,
yeah.
and she gets her own little catharsis and destruction.
I think to some degree that's what helps. That's what's like chipping away at the dam, the barrier between her and Connor, is her showing that rage, and like Connor trying to figure out what was that about. Was it because of him? Was it directed towards him? And that kind of gets Connor's mind spinning, which I think ends in the whole like, oh yeah, she's going through this too. It's
Mm-hmm.
yeah,
Yeah, starts. I think that's where the first lesson in particular really starts to hit home for him.
yeah,
Is that this is not like, you can tell a child a story, but generally it takes something tangible for that to like fit in for the kid as
mm-hmm,
to why it's more than just a story.
mm-hmm.
And I think that I agree. I think that's where it really kicks in for him. And well, so
Can I ask a question?
oh yeah, go ahead.
All right,
Absolutely.
all right. I got a question.
All
So
right.
how do you think how do you think Connor has uh, reading has let the relation what
uh,
I'm I'm
oh, are
the
you talking about?
relationship one.
Okay,
Yeah.
so what you're asking is about how I think Connor has let other relationships die in
Yes.
order to hang on to his
Yes.
relationship with his
So
mother,
so it
and I
do
think
you
it's
think that?
totally natural. I think it's totally natural for a lot of people to do that, is to cling on to something, like especially something that we're struggling to hold on to. It's easier to let go of the things that we know might be there again, or to let go of them when the thing you want the most you're not willing to let go of. And I think that's what he was doing, is just like, this is the I'm going to spend everything I have trying to save this or make up for it.
Yeah.
And at you know that's why he ends up alienating other people.
Yeah. Like
It,
Lily. I think
yeah.
that's really like I think that's one of the big reasons why he pushed Lily away and then avoided her. was because of that, because he was latching on to the one relationship that isn't going to last, and he knows this, and so he's trying to build as strong of a relationship, and maybe that might help.
Yeah. Um, I think the only one that he tries to branch out again is his dad, and unfortunately, that guy does
Dude,
not come through. Dude does not know what he's doing.
that dude
So,
sucks. So,
yeah,
okay. Let me ask that. What's your thoughts on Connor's father?
his father.
His father.
I quickly before we get into that, K Brock brings a good point. Latching on, trying not to let go, just like his nightmare, exactly like his nightmare.
Boom. Yes.
Way to bring it home, K Brock. Um, so I thought his dad might have been good intention, but I think he just is really bad at it because his mind is in two places. He's split, and the thing is it's easy for him to do that, and it's hard for the kid to see the difference because it just feels like abandonment. When when somebody that you want to be there isn't fully present with you,
Yeah.
and I think that was devastating. And while I understand to a degree, not nearly as much as you being a father, um, uh, I do understand that he has an obligation and a desire to be there for his other family, but we also don't know the full circumstances that led to him winding up in the United States.
Yeah.
We just know that his friend Lily knows that he had to have a nightlight for months, for a long time after,
After he left.
well, presumably a long time after he left. So it left a mark. And I think being in that situation, I don't know that I would know what to do because I would be stuck with this. Like, I am this representative of abandonment. I have these other people that I need to care for,
Mm-hmm.
but I have this person too, and like I would feel so. It would be so hard for me to feel like I could even be that person for Connor that Connor wants him to be because I wasn't before. When in fact it ends up being this counterproductive thing where or almost oxymoronic thing, or paradoxical even, that he needs to be that person because he's the one who left.
Mm-hmm.
I
Yeah.
and because he's the father. But like honestly, I think as well intentioned as he might have been, he wound up being more detrimental than helpful because he wasn't willing, and all he had to do was be present. And
Yeah.
even when he talks, he doesn't ever seem fully present with Connor.
Yeah.
Like even when he's making food for him or he takes him out to do stuff, he doesn't feel fully present. And I think Connor picks up on that. Like kids do.
Yeah.
They do. They absolutely do.
Yeah. I don't like the father. Uh, I think my biggest thing about the father is I think he is there as a catalyst.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why I don't like him, is because the him being a catalyst means that he is, in to some degree, the what's the literary term, the person that invokes change in the main character. It's the
Are you talking about an antagonist
Yeah,
or
yeah,
are
he's the antagonist. I think to some degree he's the antagonist because what he does is, I think he pushes Connor to a breaking point because the person he wants the most to come through for him fails, and fails badly, right? He has to go
Mhm.
back to the States in a critical moment because his wife's got a headache or whatever, or
his baby was
his
in the
baby's in
hospital,
the
and his wife
hospital.
was, yeah,
Yeah,
but his wife was supposedly freaking out about it. Like
dude.
he even makes it sound like it wasn't a
Like
big
no
deal, which
big
is like
deal.
the
She's
word.
crazy. Yeah,
Like it would be almost more understandable if you said, "My kid's in the hospital. I'm sorry, I have to
I
go."
gotta
Like
go.
that would
Yeah,
be more understandable than saying, "But it's probably
but
not a big deal.
he
Don't worry about it."
undercut it.
That makes it by undercutting it. He makes it sound like I would rather choose something trivial over being present with
This.
you.
Yeah. Yep. I can't remember. Did the father come back in time?
I don't think he does come quite in time.
Okay.
I don't remember the exact order of
Yeah.
events. I just know he's not there when he speaks his truth.
Yeah, I
I
think
don't.
yeah.
That's the only thing I know because the grandma's the one who goes to get him.
K Brock's got it. Uh,
Yeah.
what about the wife who calls him back to the States in the middle of a crisis? She's the root of his father's inability to be a father for Connor. I agree. I absolutely agree. I think that is the poison that Connor's father is dabbling with, right?
Mhm.
Like that's the reason why Connor can't see his father every once in a while is or can't do phone calls because you know his stepmom has headaches or you know whatever excuses that she's
Mhm.
got, you know, and Connor's dad is like, okay, you know, and I honestly believe that Connor's dad was ready to cut the ties, right? Like Connor's dad does not seem to want anything to do with Connor or Connor's family.
Well, because it'd be easier. There's
Right.
the thing. The problem is this father, and I think this is what makes him so frustrating. Is he doesn't want to put the work in to mend the broken bridge that the breaks that he created.
Mm-hmm.
It's easier to slink off into this other life than it is to try and repair wrongs done, and he doesn't seem committed to doing that at all. And while the stepmother, the wife or whatever, uh, while she is kind of this impetus for him having these choices to leave,
Mm-hmm.
and that's really super uncool of her. Like she has to know what's going on too.
Yeah.
Uh, while it's super uncool of her, he's ultimately the one
Oh,
making the
for sure.
decision,
Well,
and
I mean,
like, and he's taking an easier way out,
right.
and that's what I think makes it so devastating is because he could. All he has to do is reach out a hand, be there, and he does the bare minimum. He's there. He just doesn't reach out the hand, and
Right.
that's I think what you said.
Worse.
It's what really puts Connor into that sort of end stage that brings up the uh, the third story.
Yeah. So what are your thoughts on the third story?
That one I have to believe is the most straightforward of them. Is that I don't know if you've ever felt invisible before, but it sucks when, especially when you feel invisible in a crowded room, and the fact that the bully, what's his name?
Harry? No.
Yeah, yeah,
Okay.
Harry,
Okay.
Harry, yeah, yeah. The fact that Harry finds that out, dude, that kid's a freaking sociopath. Wow. Oh man,
Yeah.
I
I think
honestly, if I was in that kid, like I've not been in too dissimilar of a situation, at least like in my past, where I've had people pick on that thing.
mm-hmm.
Like I've had bullies pick on that thing that really got to me, and I never had quite the crisis that Connor had going on. At least, But honestly, I think if I had that going on with that element of bullying,
Mm-hmm.
I would have snapped in exactly the same way because like how else are you going to be seen other like
Sure.
and not just seeing the way he wants to be seen. That's the thing, because the teachers see him, but they see him as a pity case, and he doesn't want that
Right.
because again, like you mentioned, it brings it back around to what's going on, and a
Right.
fight is a good way to
Get away
really
from that.
take. Well, I mean, he's hoping that it'll be big enough for them to ignore that and do
Yeah.
something normal,
Yep.
do something that lines up. And as much and like it really hit home when I believe he's talking to that one teacher who was talking about how he'd have to be excluded, which I think is the British version of expelled.
Okay.
Uh, and he said he slumped down and he felt better because a weight was lifted because it
Right.
was the most normal thing that had
Yeah, he
happened,
was being
and somebody had
punished.
seen him in a way other than pity, and then it just right back again as soon as
Yep.
she's like, "But how could I do that?" And
Yeah.
honestly,
Especially
I
after the bullying comes to light and all that stuff. Yeah.
so what did you think of the third story then?
I I thought this, yeah, like you said, this is the one that I was like, oh, here's the clear tie to what's going on in the story and uh to the story the monster's telling, right? I thought it was kind of BS that the monster came at noon, like at 12:07 noon.
It's
uh
still
I
12:07.
know, but like it kind of, I know it had to happen, but for that imagery, that 12:07 imagery, it was, it felt cheap. It felt cheap. Uh
Actually, technically speaking, that 12:07 is the closest to that, is the only one that's actually 12:07 if you do it military time,
sure. Yeah.
because the
Yeah.
other ones
Yeah.
are triple O
Yeah.
seven.
Yeah. I know.
So
Oh,
so
you you
you're
know I
getting
know.
you're
Yeah.
getting angry at the wrong one. I get it though,
Yeah.
because
I
there is a point where I think the monster actually like there's a point where they say specifically that monsters tend to show up sometime after midnight.
Yeah. Yep, exactly.
So
Yeah, I
yeah, the monster. Well, it starts off by saying the monster showed up just after midnight.
yep.
So like that sets the precedent for that being the 12:07. I just wanted to
Yeah.
say
Yeah.
a little
Yeah,
bit.
I would say like the third story was the one that I was like, "Oh god." Like the rest I enjoyed. Like the first one was like, "Oh, that's a good story." The second one was like, "Holy crap, that's really cringy." You know? And the third one's like, "Oh god, Connor's going to kill a guy." And like this is it. This is how the story's gonna end. Patrick's gonna throw me for a loop, and it's gonna be this wild story because I don't know the ending now because Connor's gonna kill this kid, and he's gonna make it worse. Uh, that's what was going through my mind as I was reading it. Um, yeah,
Well,
I think that story though, it felt less of a story and more of a, like, I am the the it felt like a thing where the monster is no longer real but is a coping mechanism. That's the one that I think puts truth to the, this is a coping mechanism.
yeah, K Brock has a good way of tying that in a little bit. K Brock says the monster gets more and more direct about Connor's
Ooh,
place in the stories, and that's I think that
that's
really
good.
shows that they're just kind of converging into showing that they are
The same thing.
part of each other,
Yeah.
and you know the truth is getting closer and closer to the surface, just like the lessons are getting closer and closer to the surface,
Yes.
and so they're getting less and less vague, and that's how we predict that like the fourth story where does the truth have to go but to be fully revealed.
Yeah.
And I agree. I pretty early on assumed that like I pretty early on figured that most likely this uh monster is a coping mechanism. There is some elements of creativity in Connor that they mentioned in the beginning, and I was like, okay, a creative mind can create these elaborate ways to handle their emotions, and
Mm-hmm.
and this, like you said, really drives it home that that's most likely the case.
Yeah.
Um, it's very clearly inspired by the yew tree that his mom is constantly mentioning.
Yes. I would say that though they comment on Connor being an old soul, I would say that his emotional intelligence, though he might not understand it like directly in the forefront of his mind, him him naturally understanding that the monster's coping mechanism ultimately gains that healing perspective at the end is just insane. Like
Mhm.
that's it's very impressive. Um
What is,
like
and
when he tells that truth, right? And he's able to let go of that feeling, the let go of the truth and accept it as truth, and realizing that that truth is the true monster. That's like, oh Jesus, like you're like you're self-healing at this point, like that's very adult.
advanced.
Yeah.
And I would agree. Like, oh, I think that we really have to get into the fourth story now. Is
Yeah.
like, what were people's thoughts, reactions, like both mentally and emotionally to that scene, that fourth story? And I found it so incredibly emotionally profound, not just because of his ability to do it, but because of my own connection with letting go
Hmm.
of things that are incredibly painful, realizing that to let them go, you have to realize that there's a part of you that wants to keep them. It really ties everything together in this way that I know for certain I wouldn't have been able to do at that age. Like, not
Yeah.
even close. Like, even if you take all the fantastical elements out, like the fact that he's able to walk himself through essentially all of the stages of grief,
Right. Like,
like without understanding what he's going through. Now, granted, there's some destruction and havoc wreaked along the way, but the fact that he got there is incredible, especially when, well,
I
I don't want to get too far ahead because we still want to, I want to discuss the
I
moment with his mother separately.
I think I think the really impressive part though is the the monster being the rock. Like, so this is where, the monster at this point in the story we're like, okay, the monster's probably a coping mechanism. But then we
Mhm.
get into the fourth story and we're like, this monster is like, you're not going to make it. You aren't going to make it unless you say your truth. You're just not going to. And he's unrelenting, right? That monster
Mhm.
is letting Connor not letting Connor take the easy way out. And that is like, okay, that's starting to bring me back, right? We're like, okay, this is really intelligent for such a young child to like walk through all of this stuff by himself. And now it's like that unrelentingness is like, man, are you a force, that an acting force, are maybe this is a fantastical creature, or some entity, right? Because
Well,
like
yeah.
who
Is there an entity that's maybe casting itself through
right,
him? Like maybe that he has an element to it.
yeah, because
Because it seems like so much for a kid to do, in particular to recognize that the precipice between destruction and salvation are so close to each other.
yeah,
They're practically one and the same, and it's a razor's edge
yep,
sometimes. And to recognize that is,
well, it,
it's hard
yeah,
for me to imagine a kid doing it. But the thing is I know that there are kids out there who do it.
sure,
I mean,
but
I uh,
you're saying, like, identifying the razor's edge, but then also like making the correct choice. Like that's the big thing,
that,
is like
that's
making the
well,
correct
that's a
choice,
hard
and
thing to do.
then forcing yourself to do it, right? Because like the natural, at least I believe the normal reaction is that human nature is lazy, right? Like most people are like anything else in nature. If you are at rest and nothing is forcing you to move, you're not going to move, right? But this kid is like, listen, brain, we're not going to get anywhere. We're not going to heal unless we accept this truth. And that's where I'm like, okay, this might be an outside actor working in on Connor, because who to identify it is one thing, but then to force yourself to do it is like, that's a big stretch.
Yeah, I mean, but it is possible, and I
Oh,
think
sure.
K. Brock makes a good point. Would that we all had a monster to force us to say our truth.
Yep.
If it is an outside force, he is a very lucky kid indeed. But when you think about it, he's facing the scariest thing that he knows. That
Mm-hmm.
nightmare is the scariest thing he's ever experienced. So, what does it take to push you past that precipice to fall on the right side of the razor's edge? But a monster.
Right.
It has to be something scarier than the thing that you dread, the thing that you refuse to look at.
Mm-hmm.
And man, did I identify with that. And that took me so many years to even
Right.
see that yeah, part of me though, I'm not gonna lie, part of me wants to believe the monster does have a fantastical element
Right.
to it, just because like it's nice to think of good acting forces out
Yes.
there. They might not always look good, but that there's things that can help us. But the other thing is why can't we believe in the strengths within ourselves, even in
Right.
children?
Right.
Is why does it have to be something bigger than us? Or why does it have to be that outside entity? Why can't we
Yeah.
have that strength?
And it looks like,
And it really gets super introspective.
yeah.
Like,
Well, it looks like Skittles had the same thing too. They said that, the ending really made them shift their thinking from it being a coping mechanism to an external force. So I do like, and I appreciate what Patrick is doing is, as you're going through the story, you're like, is it not, right? Is it a actual thing, a creature, or some outside force, or is it just him? And he keeps you on your toes about it, and by the end of the book I don't think you actually have an answer. You by
and
the
entirely by design.
Yeah, yeah,
All right.
absolutely.
So, um, I think we need to move into the part that we have, at least I have been both dreading and most looking forward to this entire time, and that's the scene where he speaks his truth to his mom.
Okay, so
Uh, yeah.
so
What were
what were your
what was
thoughts
your
on?
my experience of it was, oh boy, so many emotions. um, Second time through, and I'm not gonna lie, there were tears.
Hmm.
There were, like, honestly, to speak it to yourself is a huge accomplishment, but to speak it to the person who needs to hear it when it's not yourself, it takes such a huge amount of courage and vulnerability to be able to do that, and to do it in the face of something as grim and desperate as the death of your own mother.
Yeah.
Like, I hope one day in the very,
Oh,
very, very distant future, I have the same courage. You know,
yeah.
you know.
I think if I'm gonna go out there and say it, if you didn't have heartstrings pulled at this point, what's going on, right? Like,
Yeah, what there might be something a wee bit wrong with you. Like,
we but like I thought this part was another part showing, like, the monster's unrelenting push was just confirming how healthy the monster has been and is for Connor,
mhm.
right? Like, I was really worried, when Connor didn't want to hold his mom's hand, but then eventually did. It was like, oh man, you're gonna f this up, dude. And you're, looking at it from being past that point, right? From
God,
being past that situation, like looking back, I'm like, dude, you are gonna regret this.
mhm.
You need to do this. You need to speak your truth. and his mind or this external force, whatever it was, realizes this and forces him to do it. And that was just like, that was super cathartic. In
Mhm.
my opinion, like, not for my situation, but like just for the book. Like, you had all this like really slow emotional build up throughout the whole book.
Mhm.
Patrick does a great job laying the groundwork for all of this emotion to culminate at the end and then come to some really strong catharsis just right there, right at the end of the book.
And
And it's really impressive.
absolutely. And I really like that Kay brought up is that the mother's words to her son were awesome, awesome, telling him that he can be as angry as he needs to be. She was finally the person
Yeah.
who was there for him the way he needed them to be.
Yep.
And in that way, like I started seeing elements of the mother in the monster as well. Like the monster just took on a form that had to be gruesome and had to be scarier than that precipice. And she is the one waiting there to catch him when he falls, even in her final moments. And man, hey Skittle, like I almost feel bad for you being in Meyer when this
Yeah.
happened because it would not feel right not to let it out.
Yeah.
Like it just like I'm holding it back now and it feels a little bit wrong. Like because I'm still in that moment and I'm
Yeah.
like I identify with the mom, Connor, and even the monster myself because I don't use the same tactics as the monster, but like when people around me are grieving, I tend to take on that sort of role of trying to create a space for them to speak their truth, to just do what they need to do to get through their grief
Hmm.
because they so that they don't have to feel ashamed or scared or anymore, that they can just be. And that's a hard thing to do. And I think that's why sometimes it takes a monsters because sometimes you kind of have to turn yourself at least briefly into the enemy so
Yeah.
that people have that space. And that's not something I'm particularly comfortable with, but like I get why that was necessary. And, like I think this book, like you said, among all the books that I've read, is definitely in my top five for its ability to build emotionality and bring it to such a serene and cathartic and I can't even think of the exact right word, but just the right end. It wasn't a good necessarily a good or perfect end. It was just the right one.
Yeah. Yeah. I agree. What's chat have to say here? K Brock. I know people who call Cancer the Beast or the Monster. Was the monster his mom when Cancer took her over?
Well, it sounded like uh, she had been going through that stuff for a while before the monster manifested, but I think that there is absolutely a link there, K Brock, because the link to the mom is her obsession with the U tree.
Yeah.
And that's why the monster manifests as that U tree. And yeah, there are elements of her in it. And it's amazing how this all kind of just comes together in just a completely synchronous and compatible way. And he resolves it in the most satisfactory way I could possibly imagine. It's not pretty. It's not, easy to handle. It's what it needs to be.
It's very
And
human.
it is. And circling back to our first impressions.
Yeah.
So now that we've gone through all of them, I would really like to know from the chat what was your favorite of the stories, or did you have a favorite? And same question to you, Alan. Like, what was
Why
your
don't you hit me with yours and I will take the lead.
honestly uh, the fourth one slash his own truth because that's where it brings it all together. It's that I'm not gonna lie. the emotional catharsis that I had for myself was not insignificant while reading this book, and this is the second time that I'm reading, you know, and I really loved how Patrick Ness brought it all together and really spoke about the power of truth, not like the everybody is true, the objective truth of the universe, but our truths, our personal truths, and how powerful those can be. A Skittle says he really liked the second because the reaction of the apothecary was so human,
Yeah.
and I totally get that. Like,
I'm
why? How?
I'm right there with them. I really enjoyed like the, when I was reading it. That was for sure my favorite. After this conversation, I kind of want to lean towards the fourth, but I'm still gonna say, my second was there, mainly because I think it's a just desserts thing, right? Like though the apothecary uh, was not a perfect man and was not necessarily a good man. You know, uh, uh, the the minister who destroys someone for whatever reason. I couldn't figure out what the minister's reason was. But destroys this man and his business, and then gets himself in that situation, or is in the situation that he's in the end. I just felt like Skittles was saying, like, that was a really human reaction, just the destruction and allowing Connor the permission to destroy.
Yeah. Of the stories that the monster told, my favorite was actually the first. I think it speaks to how everybody, like, things are not always as they seem. It's not always black and white. You really have to look at the truths in front of you. Yes, we do want to look backwards to learn from history. Yes, we do want to look forwards to plan better, but ultimately we have to deal in the immediate truths.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, and the fact that people are more than just one thing. I think we get so caught up in making people, you're this, you're that, like, just putting labels on things that are never as complex as it is to be human.
Yeah.
Uh, Kate Brock says hers, she didn't have a favorite, which is totally valid. She liked them all. The author has a gift for description and making ordinary everyday things relatable to things we readers have experienced in our own lives, and it makes us more connected to the story. And I agree, it's not easy to pick a favorite. That's why I picked the fourth, is because I thought it brought the most together. But if I, you know, and Patrick Ness absolutely does have just such a great way of bringing these smaller stories together, which actually I want to bring this up. That element of having other stories, like three stories within a story, was actually attributed to um, Siobhan Dowd. That was
Really?
part of the idea she left behind. There, yeah,
Really?
the audiobook that I read actually had an interview with Patrick Ness
Oh,
afterwards,
oh, really?
and he actually said that
Oh,
that element was already in place, and he chose to run with that element. And so, but his ability to use that idea is just, you know, chef's kiss. um, all right, so kind of getting into our final
yeah.
impressions.
Let's see here. Do 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 do. So, okay, so I wanted to ask this question before we get into final
Okay.
uh, impressions. And this is actually a question more directed for you. I kind of want to stray away from these, so chat, feel free to kick in, but this is really towards Alex. Alex, looking at this from a professional point of view,
Oh, okay.
Yep. So, looking at this from a professional point of view, what this kid did throughout the entire story, was it healthy, and was it, I don't know if in your field there's a correct, but like, what, analyzing this from a professional side of things, what did this kid kind of do for himself?
Okay. I want to preface this by saying I am not a licensed professional.
That's
I
fair.
do have some training, and my master's degree is in health psychology. So I do have a lot more insight into this than the average bear. Uh, but it is normal, in as normal a thing can be. He went through what we call the Kubler-Ross 5 stages of grief. There's uh, denial, anger, acceptance, bargaining. Sorry, denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance. And he goes through all of these, and he kind of has to. What he's really doing is getting himself to that acceptance place, which is so hard to do. And to do it before the actual death happens, people spend months or years. Some people go lifetimes without ever really getting there.
Yeah,
And
I would
the
totally
fact that
agree.
he's able to do that, that is very healthy. The fact that he does it on his own is shows an incredible level of what we call, well, resilience. That's what that is. His ability to adapt to the situation and to effectively do it on his own is honestly awe-inspiring. Like if that were a real child. Um, However, the way he went about it, while understandable and clinically normal, not healthy. Because
Really.
ideally, what he would have had is he would have had that support from his dad. Wouldn't
Hmm.
necessarily have to take him to the U.S., but if he had just been present with him,
Sure.
he would have maybe provided a little more stability, and maybe the monster manifests in a different way that takes him to the same, all roads leading to Rome.
Hmm.
It can get you there. In fact, like that's actually something when I was doing clinical training that they told us is all roads do lead to Rome. When if you can keep that destination in mind, is that the client is going to take their own path there.
Hmm.
You just have to show them their options, and they're going to ultimately choose. And I think the kid shows the capacity that he could get there either way.
Hmm.
This didn't need to be the way, and beating the absolute pulp out of another kid, breaking his arm or whatever,
Yeah.
like breaking
Destroyed
breaking his
him.
arm and nose is absolutely not healthy. But because that what that is he was internalizing rage and refusing to deal with it. That's not healthy. Where he wound up was
Okay.
his acceptance, his ability to say, in fact, like I think this is the part that felt the most serene and cathartic to me was when he said he knew it wasn't going to be easy, but
Hmm.
he knew he'd be okay.
Hmm.
That's where like any aspiring clinician wants to get somebody who's dealing with grief. In fact, like I have a little extra insight into this because before I switched tracks, one of our projects was to create a was to actually create a program that people could actually run, like a clinical program for people to run, specifically a group program. And mine was actually centered around persistent grief, like any grief that's affecting day to day life up to 2 years after a loss.
Okay.
It was originally based on doing it for groups who are suicide survivors, like survivors of those who committed suicide.
Right. Okay.
Like so I've done a fair amount of research into this, and that where he wound up is the goal. That is where we want people to be. We
Yeah.
want because we're not there to get them all the way through it. We're not there to like hold their hands the whole way. Or we might lead. It's kind of like you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make it drink.
Right.
We want to get them to this point where they're going to be okay on their own because we can't be there every single day. We can't be there in every single situation.
Hmm.
And that's what he does. That's incredibly healthy. And, you know, honestly, if I were an acting clinician, and if I was working with teens in particular, or even adults, honestly, this is a book that if they were dealing with grief
Hmm.
or loss of any kind, I would highly recommend this book. I would absolutely want to monitor it because you want to be careful
Right.
about people who can't handle it. But this is something that I think could give some major insight to a lot of people. And, I'm really glad I went back and read it because I didn't realize, like, when I saw it, I didn't realize just how poignant and profound it was.
Hmm.
And I don't know why I was so distracted when I was reading it, or maybe it's because I watched the movie first.
Sure.
You know, whatever the case, because I read this like literally. I finished the movie, found the book,
Hmm.
read it.
Well, I think
Like
I
there
think
was
to
less than a day in between.
I think to some
Uh,
degree it could just be because of what we do for the 800s, right? That's kind of nice about the 800s is you're reading with a different perspective now. You're not reading to consume. You're reading to almost analyze, right? You're consuming the content, but also thinking of it in a way to generate conversation or answer
yeah.
questions to conversation. So like rewinding back a little bit before we start wrapping up here. Um, what would your uh talk me through what are some of the things that the father could have done remotely or presently to kind of aid Connor in a healthy manner. What are
Uh,
especially remotely, right? Things going on right now. Not everybody can be where they need to be.
yeah.
So what are some things that people, maybe not just fathers in specific situations like this, but like people in general, what can people do in order to kind of help others work through things in these times where remote activity is a big deal?
Quickly before we get a
Oh,
far
sure.
field, Kay Brock mentioned that she knows three boys slash young men whose father passed away and whose mother has metastatic cancer and is currently fighting it. And they spoke to the oldest, as mentioned, and they mentioned this book, and I hope they read it too, K Rock. I think this could bring a lot of insight. And as far as your question, Alan, that's a tough one. And again, I have to preface this by saying
Yeah.
I am not a clinician. This is not an expert opinion. This is just based on my knowledge and what I would do if I was in the father's shoes. There are some options. One, I really don't get why they weren't in counseling with this kid.
Yeah.
Because this kid honestly should have been, especially like even if the father couldn't be there, you can do family counseling. Family counseling could have been invaluable for this kid.
Hmm.
And right now, a lot of counseling is being done virtually, so distance wouldn't necessarily matter. They mentioned Skype, so that was a technology then. Ethically speaking, it would have been difficult because telecom security is only recently become secure enough for medical work
Sure.
uh, and HIPAA. But other things he could have done, I think he needed to listen more. Just
The
listen.
father.
Let the kid, yeah,
Yeah.
like you don't necessarily need to let them escape from everything, but you just need to be there because like everything that this guy does is he seemed distracted when he was with the kid, or like it may have even been helpful to let him know that he was in out of his depth, like to let
Sure.
you to let
To
you
level.
know that like I'm struggling too, to just say it out loud.
Yeah.
Like people have this idea that being a rock is the only way you can help people, and it's not. Sometimes people need to see you be vulnerable before they can be vulnerable,
Yeah.
and maybe a little bit of that vulnerability and empathy beyond his "I made you eggs"
Hmm.
would have been helpful. And
I think to jump in, I think like when you're talking about like uh opening up more or like letting the kid speak his what's going on and stuff like that. Like his dad was so close there at the pizzeria, right? Like really
Yeah,
close. Like Connor mentions the monster a couple of times, and his dad picks up on it and then lets it go. Where
yeah,
I think what you're saying is his dad should have dug into that. Like,
yep.
tell me about this monster. What's going on with you? Who are you now?
Yeah, and I think he dismiss, and that's exactly right. Is he was dismissing clues to things where he could have dug in a little bit more
Yeah,
or just listened a little more intently. And yeah, we're human. We're not all going to pick up on all these signals. Like, don't beat yourself up if there's something somebody said. It's not necessarily your fault for missing that because not everybody's attuned to it. We
yeah,
don't know for certain what's important to somebody and what's not. Especially like with a kid mentioning a monster, like it's easy to think, oh, they must have had a bad dream or something. But
yeah.
like, so don't beat yourself up if you don't get those signals. It's just it helps to actively listen. That's what
That's
the
fair.
term actually
Yeah,
is actively listening to somebody, engaging with them and letting them just speak honestly, creating a space where they feel safe. And I think that's what pissed me off about the dad. It's like
well,
he had the opportunity to create a safe space and he just didn't.
he flubbed it.
And
Yeah.
like,
Well, I
yeah.
think to speak to that too. I think going back to our earliest conversation, I think that that's what Connor was craving, right? He doesn't want to be treated with pity. He doesn't want to be treated with empathy or sympathy. He just wants to talk to somebody like in a normal conversation, right?
Mhm,
Like what you're saying, like just creating a safe space to talk about things.
mhm.
So let's get into our final impressions. Do you think?
You go ahead and start us off this time.
Yeah, yeah. So let's see. Do you think we kind of covered this? Do you think Connor is on a healthy path of healing? Uh,
I would say yes. Um, I the fact that he's reached an acceptance level. Will there be times where you backslide? Yeah. The people like to think the 5 stages of grief are this linear thing, and it's really not.
mm-hmm,
Acceptance is the biggest step forward you can take for sure, but like there's little. It happens in these little microcosms that can like. There's sometimes you go through the 5 stages within the 5 stages, and sometimes you backslide and you need to work your way back through, but that's okay. It's a part of the process. It's just the 5 stages are just there as a means of kind of understanding what we go through and normalizing that. And he's definitely been through it. And
yeah,
I think he's on his healthy way.
yeah.
What about you?
I think so too, and I think like you're saying with the 5 stages of grief not being linear. I actually think that Pat Rothfuss did a really good job of talking about something like this, where you've got doors, right?
Mhm.
And when you're behind a door, that's where you're at, right? So if your 5 stages are thought of more of like 5 doors, you can enter a door. You can go in and out of a door, and so it can be semi-cyclical, right? You can go
Mhm.
back into stages and come out of them, and that's still a healthy thing.
Yeah, I think K Rock has a good point. Is that it can be very circular and
Yeah.
a bit of a spot upward or outward spiral where you revisit things from different angles. And the doors metaphor works as well. I mean, there's no one metaphor for it. It's just whatever suits you. This is just a way to. It's a theoretical construct that helps people kind of understand something that is infinitely complex.
Yeah.
So, some my closing thoughts are, I do believe this is a great book, but something I want to talk about is that's important to me is for anybody struggling um, with grief or loss in their lives. If you see this and this brings up something and you're struggling with it, I want to let you know that there are resources out there. There is the SAMHSA National Helpline. That's SAMHSA National Helpline. The number is 1-800-662-8255. HELP. That's 1-800-662-4357. You can call that hotline for any sort of help you need with uh, anything from grief and loss to suicide prevention and self harm. There's also the Grief and Loss Crisis Response Network at crisisnetwork.org. You can go there, and there's a lot of resources. I encourage anybody who may be struggling and maybe has brought something up that's not fully resolved. If you really need help, please don't hesitate to reach out. And for anybody who isn't necessarily going through this, or who has and wants to maybe donate to a cause that supports this, Alan actually brought this to my attention, and I've been impressed with what I've read so far. It's called Jasper's Game Day. It's a nonprofit where their mission is to raise funds for suicide prevention and awareness, and reducing the stigma around talking about mental health through building a community based around love for all things RPG, which is the very core foundation of the DM's table. So a shout out to them, and we this is I'm putting my stamp on Alan's recommendation
Yes.
here to go check them out. Please, we'd love to see you
Great.
contribute. They have not sponsored this, but yeah,
Yeah. Great.
apparently
Great
Pastmaster
organization.
Nezra knows about them. Yeah. Um, I actually will probably be looking a lot more into this myself, and I
Yes.
encourage everybody else to do so as well.
Yes. So I have the results from the vote. Let's get into that. The results are in. Save. So read by February 13th. The Travelers by Regina Porter. That is the
Alrighty.
next book we are going to be reading. Go
That's
ahead
our
and
first one for Black History Month, I believe.
yes, it
Correct.
is. It is. Go ahead and pick that guy up and enjoy it. And then also make sure to start reading, if you haven't already, The Blacksmith's Son. We'll be talking about that next time on January 30th. That's The Blacksmith's Son by Michael Manning. Yes. Also, I want to plug this. So we have heard your suggestions, and we have made a webpage over on the DM's table. So it's at dmstable.com/the800's. .com/the800's, and over there you can get all the information about past books and the current book we're reading. It is also going to have the link to the YouTube and the Twitch stream, so go check that out if you're like, wait, what book are we reading?
All right, and I believe we still have. Do we have our list ready for the next vote or no?
No, we don't.
Okay, so
I've
you do
been
have,
slipping.
we'll say until Monday to get us suggestions for Black History
Yes.
Month, our second vote uh, for that. So if you know any Black authors that, ideally Black American authors that you would love to see represented on that list, please let us know and we'll try and get them in there. We'll only be picking from 3 books, but we're definitely open to suggestions from anybody. And that will wrap up Black History Month, and then we'll be sliding right into Women's Month, and that's all of March. So also start thinking about some of your favorite female authors.
Yes.
Country of origin or ethnicity doth not matter, but we'd love to hear any and all suggestions that you have, and hit us up. Like Alan said, you can hit us at our socials or talk to us directly, and we can get you in on the Discord, and you can let us know there as well.
Yep. So our social medias, we're over on Facebook at the DM's Table and on Twitter at DM's Table. You can DM us for a link to our Discord. We'll send you an invite link, and you can join in the conversation there. Also, if you want in on the voting to have a little more say in what we're going to read, go check out our Patreon, patreon.com/DM's Table. Our lowest tier Patreon support will get you in on the voting session. It also gets you in on a Patreon section and gets you some cool perks as well.
You just need $2 to get in on the vote, though. $2 a
Yep,
month.
$2 a month. And let's see.
And you are welcome, K. Brock. And thank you, Adam,
Yeah,
for ultimately bringing this book to our attention. Like I had been voting for something else because I had read this one more recently, but I am really glad that I got to revisit it and that we got to share it with you all.
yes. Thank you guys. Also, big thank you to Grizzo 1007 and Captain Copper Carrot. You guys joined in as followers between our last stream and today. Thank you for joining. Also, don't forget to tell people to join our little book club. If you've got other readers in your life that really enjoy the 800 section of the Dewey Decimal System, please inform them that we are doing this sort of thing and let them know what you think of us. Hopefully, it's positive.
And let them know also that this, they don't have to keep up with every week. We'd be happy even if you're dropping in and out. That's why we're doing 2 books a month. Is like if you can't keep up with all of them, pick a book a month or something, and we'd be happy to have you anytime that you can show up. So, like you said, Alan, just give it to any readers you feel like might want to connect and discuss the books, not just read them on their own. We'd be happy to have you all. All right, thank you all very much for joining us again today, and this has been a very special episode of the 800's.
Yes, thank you. See y'all.
See y'all. Bye.